Don't sign that, the black girl whispered. The billionaire's smile vanished instantly. The room froze, and the silence that followed was deafening. No one in that high-powered boardroom knew what to make of it. It wasn't the kind of interruption they were used to. Richard Harrison, the billionaire CEO, stood at the head of the table, a confident grin on his face as he was about to make the deal of a lifetime. But when the young woman spoke, everything shifted. She wasn't a lawyer or a senior executive. She wasn't even a part of the meeting. She was just a lowly employee, one of the cleaning staff. Maya Williams, with her uniform and name tag that read housekeeping, stood near the door, holding a tray of water bottles. Her voice, soft yet clear, had cut through the tension in the room like a blade. Richard looked up from the contract he was about to sign, his grin faltering. The room, which had been buzzing with excitement, went quiet. Every eye turned toward Maya, some with confusion, others with surprise, but no one dared to speak. Richard's eyes narrowed as he studied her. The audacity of this young woman to interrupt such a critical moment made him feel a rush of irritation. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone sharp. Maya didn't flinch. She stood tall, her posture straight despite the uncomfortable position she found herself in. "I said, don't sign that," she repeated calmly, her eyes locked on his. The billionaire raised an eyebrow. "And why would you say that?" he asked, the disbelief evident in his voice. Maya glanced around the room, seeing the skeptical faces of the board members and the nervous assistants. But she didn't let their judgment faze her. Her eyes shifted back to Richard, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of something other than fear or subservience in her expression. "Because," Maya continued, "there's a clause in that contract that could destroy your company." The room remained silent. Richard's grip on his pen tightened as he stared at her. How could a woman in housekeeping know anything about the fine print of a multi-million-dollar contract? He had been in business for decades, and no one had ever questioned his decisions, let alone a young woman who was supposed to be invisible. But something about Maya's words made him pause. He looked down at the contract, his mind racing. No one had pointed out this clause before. The legal team had cleared it, the advisors had signed off on it. And yet, here she was, a simple employee, claiming that this deal could ruin everything. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Richard asked, his voice betraying a hint of unease. Maya's gaze didn't waver. "I'm suggesting you're about to make a mistake," she said softly, but with a weight that made it feel like the truth. Richard swallowed hard, his mind spinning. He wanted to dismiss her, to laugh it off as the nonsense of a naive worker who didn't know any better. But something in her voice, in her confidence, made him hesitate. His pen hovered above the dotted line, his fingers twitching. He glanced around at the board members, who were all watching him, waiting for him to make the final decision. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, and for the first time, Richard wasn't sure. He cleared his throat. "Take a seat," he said to Maya, his tone softer than before, though still laced with skepticism. Maya stepped forward, placing the tray on the table and taking a seat across from him. The room was still. The meeting had come to an abrupt halt. Richard scanned the contract again, his mind now clouded with doubt. The numbers, the legalese, the promises, everything had seemed so solid. But now, with Maya's words ringing in his ears, he wondered if there was something he had missed. He rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure of the decision weighing on him. Maya sat still, her calmness in stark contrast to the chaos swirling in the room. She had no power here. She had no position. She had no right to be in this room. But somehow, she had managed to shift the balance. "I don't know what game you're playing," Richard muttered, staring at the contract, "but you're wrong." Yet, even as he said the words, his doubt grew. He had been wrong before. He had made mistakes before. And something told him this time might be different. Something told him Maya was right. But would he dare to trust her? Richard's mind raced as he sat in his office, staring at the contract in front of him. He had been ready to sign it just moments ago, but Maya's words had thrown everything into turmoil. The room was silent now, the board members still unsure of how to react. They had all witnessed the interruption, and they were all waiting for Richard to take charge, to make the decision that would shape their company's future. But for the first time, Richard hesitated. The numbers, the legal jargon, the promises, it all seemed so solid, so secure. But Maya had seen something he hadn't. Maya, how could someone like her, someone who spent her days cleaning floors and serving coffee, possibly know more about business contracts than him. Yet, something in her gaze had made him pause. She had been calm, confident even, when she spoke. He wasn't used to being challenged like that, especially not by someone from the lower ranks. But her words kept echoing in his mind. Don't sign that. Richard leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to clear his thoughts. The weight of the decision pressed on him, and he found himself staring at Maya across the table, who hadn't moved a muscle since her declaration. She wasn't one of the suits. She wasn't a lawyer or an executive. She was just a cleaning lady. And yet, there she was, forcing him to question everything. What do you think, Richard? One of the board members asked, breaking the silence. Richard opened his eyes and glanced around the room. Everyone was waiting for him to make a move. But for the first time, he wasn't so sure. Give me a moment, he said, his voice tighter than usual. He could feel the tension building, the eyes of his colleagues on him, waiting for him to make the call. But Maya's calm, unwavering confidence had shaken him to his core. He couldn't just dismiss her. Not this time. Maya sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't intimidated. She was just waiting for him to make the right decision. Richard couldn't help but wonder what it was that Maya had seen that the others hadn't. How had she figured it out? How had she spotted the flaw in the contract so quickly? He stared at the document again, flipping through the pages, reading every word as if for the first time. And then he saw it. There it was. The clause. The one that could have cost them everything. It was subtle, buried deep within the fine print, but it was there. A hidden risk that no one had noticed before. Richard's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. Maya had been right. She had saved him from making a disastrous mistake. He looked up from the contract, meeting Maya's gaze once again. For a moment, there was no judgment, no superiority, just a quiet recognition of what had just happened. Richard's mind swirled with thoughts. He had been so sure of himself before, so confident in his decision. But now he felt like a fool. You were right, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya's expression didn't change. She had known he would say that. It wasn't a victory for her. It wasn't about being right. It was about the truth. And the truth had come out. The room was still. Richard put the pen down, his decision made. The contract was no longer on the table. The board members exchanged glances, murmuring to each other in disbelief. They had never seen Richard hesitate like this. They had never seen him doubt himself. But there, in that moment, Richard Harrison wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was a man who had been proven wrong by someone who, just moments ago, had seemed invisible. We'll need to revise this contract, Richard said, his voice steady, but with an edge of something he hadn't felt in years, humility. He looked at Maya once more, his gaze softer now, filled with something he had never expected to see in her eyes, respect. Richard Harrison walked out of the conference room, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Maya Williams had done something no one else had been able to do. She had interrupted him, challenged him, and in the end, she had been right. He couldn't help but replay the moment in his mind. He had been so certain, so confident that signing the contract was the right move. But Maya had opened his eyes to the truth, a truth that had been buried beneath layers of legal jargon and business promises. He had always prided himself on being sharp, on knowing every angle. But in that moment, Maya had outsmarted him. He felt a mix of frustration and admiration. The other board members followed him out of the room, still whispering among themselves, clearly stunned by what had just transpired. Richard could feel their eyes on him, but he wasn't concerned with their opinions. Not now. Not after what had just happened. Maya had proven that the people in positions of power, the ones who believed they held all the cards, could still be wrong. He glanced over at Maya, who was now standing quietly in the hallway. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something in them he hadn't noticed before. There was no fear, no hesitation, just calm confidence. Maya hadn't done it for the recognition or the praise. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. Richard took a deep breath and walked toward her. Maya, he began, his voice a little softer than usual. I want to thank you. You saved me today. Maya stood tall, her posture never wavering. I didn't save you, Mr. Harrison, she replied, her tone respectful yet firm. I just pointed out the truth. Richard nodded, his gaze steady. He had always thought of himself as someone who could spot talent, who could recognize brilliance when he saw it. But Maya had been standing right in front of him this whole time, and he had never noticed. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're a lot more than just someone who cleans the floors." Maya didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, as if weighing his words. Then, she spoke again, her voice calm, but with a hint of something deeper beneath it. "It's not about what I do, Mr. Harrison. It's about what's right. And sometimes, people forget that." Richard stood there, thinking about her words. He had spent so much of his life climbing to the top, making decisions that affected millions of people, but in that moment, Maya had reminded him of something he had long since forgotten: the importance of doing what was right, no matter who you are. "I'd like to offer you something," Richard said after a moment of silence. Maya raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "What's that?" she asked. "A job. Not just as housekeeping," Richard said. "You're too sharp to be in that role. I want you to come work for me, to help me with the things I don't see. You've got an eye for details, Maya, and I think I need that kind of insight." Maya considered his offer, her expression unreadable. She had always been content with her life, content with doing what she did best, keeping things clean, keeping things in order. But there was something in Richard's words that made her stop and think. She had never expected anything from him. In fact, she had never expected anything from anyone. She had simply done what she believed was right. But now, Richard was offering her something more. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady. "But only if I can keep doing things the right way. I won't compromise on that." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As he turned to walk away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for Maya. She wasn't just a cleaner. She wasn't just a lowly employee. She was someone who had the courage to stand up and speak the truth, even when it wasn't easy. And for the first time in a long time, Richard Harrison felt like he had a lot to learn from her. The following days after Richard's decision were a blur for Maya. She had thought she would return to her usual routine, cleaning the offices and keeping the company's floors spotless. But now, every time she stepped into the building, there was a weight on her shoulders, an expectation that had never been there before. Richard had kept his word. He had made arrangements for her to begin working directly with him on a few projects, a move that surprised both her and the rest of the staff. It wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, and yet, something about the offer felt right. She wasn't a trained businesswoman, but Richard had seen something in her that she hadn't even known was there. She had always just done her job, nothing more, nothing less. But now, in this strange new position, she found herself thinking more critically about the choices people made. She saw patterns. She noticed the small things others overlooked. Her mind was sharp, and she was beginning to understand that she could apply her knowledge in ways she hadn't imagined before. It wasn't long before Richard started involving her in meetings, asking for her opinion on matters that would typically only concern the executives. She didn't understand all of it, but she didn't need to. What she understood was how people acted, how they responded when they were cornered, when they were challenged. Richard had placed his trust in her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had earned something. The company had its own set of rules, its hierarchy, its biases. But in the quiet moments, when it was just her and Richard, she could see the shift. Richard was listening to her, not just because he had to, but because he wanted to. One day, during a quiet lunch break, Richard asked her if she was happy in her new role. Maya looked out of the window, watching the city below. She hadn't thought about it much, but now that he asked, she realized something. "I think I am," she replied, her voice calm. "I never expected any of this, but it feels like I'm actually doing something that matters." Richard smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "You do matter, Maya. More than you think." The words struck her deeply, more than she had expected. She had always believed her worth was tied to her work, to her ability to stay invisible, to just keep everything running smoothly. But here she was, recognized for more than just cleaning floors. She was being seen as an equal, as someone with something valuable to offer. Over the next few weeks, Maya found herself drawn into more complex decisions, helping Richard and his team navigate contracts, mergers, and negotiations. She was becoming an integral part of the company's success, and while she still didn't fully understand everything, she knew one thing for sure. The power wasn't just in the hands of the wealthy or the educated. It was in the hands of those who could see what others couldn't. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Richard and Maya sat down for coffee in his office. The city lights glistened through the large windows, and the noise of the outside world seemed far away. Maya felt the exhaustion in her bones, but she also felt a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't known before. "You know, Maya," Richard said, breaking the silence, "I've been in this business a long time, but I've never had anyone like you on my team. I've made some big decisions in my life, but this one, bringing you in, it's been one of the best ones." Maya looked at him, surprised. She had never imagined that her presence could mean something so significant to someone like Richard. He had always been the one in control, the one making the decisions. And yet, now, she had become someone who was changing the course of things, just by being herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But it's not just me. It's all of us, working together." Richard nodded. "Maybe, but you've opened my eyes to something important. And I'm not sure I would have seen it if you hadn't stepped up." Maya smiled to herself, feeling a warmth in her chest that was completely unfamiliar. For once, she wasn't just invisible. She was seen, and it felt like the beginning of something new, something she had never dared to imagine. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but as she left the office that evening, Maya couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. She had started as just another employee, another face in the crowd. But now, she was someone who mattered, someone who had a voice. And for the first time in a long time, Maya was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world was finally ready to listen. As weeks passed, Maya's role at the company began to feel more natural. She no longer felt like an outsider, an invisible figure working behind the scenes. She was now an integral part of the team, her opinions valued and her contributions recognized. Richard had continued to involve her in meetings, offering her more responsibility and placing more trust in her judgment. The other executives, once skeptical of her presence, had slowly warmed up to her. They were starting to see what Richard had seen from the start: Maya's intelligence, her keen eye for detail, and her ability to see things others couldn't. It wasn't long before Maya found herself sitting at the table with the rest of the high-powered team, discussing company strategies and making decisions that would impact their future. She wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. She was an advisor, a trusted member of the company. One afternoon, Richard asked Maya to join him for a private meeting in his office. It wasn't unusual for them to meet, but there was something about today that felt different. As she walked into the office, she noticed the serious look on Richard's face. He had a stack of papers in front of him, a contract he had been reviewing for days. "Maya," he said, his tone calm but focused, "I've been thinking. You've proven yourself time and time again. I'm ready to offer you something more permanent." Maya tilted her head slightly, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked. Richard smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "I'm offering you a position as a strategic advisor. You'll work directly with me, helping me navigate contracts, partnerships, and decisions that affect the company. No more temporary roles. This is a permanent position." Maya was taken aback. She hadn't expected this, not at all. A permanent role? It felt like a dream, but it also felt like it was something she had earned. She had worked hard, proved her worth, and now, here she was, being offered something she had never imagined for herself. "I don't know what to say," Maya said quietly, her voice betraying her surprise. Richard leaned forward, looking at her intently. "You don't have to say anything right now. I just want you to know that this is yours if you want it. You've earned it." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't the position that mattered. It was the respect. The recognition that, despite everything, despite the years of being overlooked, underestimated, and ignored, she had finally made it. She had finally proven herself. "I'll take it," she said, her voice steady. Richard's smile widened. "Good. I knew you would." As she walked out of his office, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment wash over her. She had done it. She had gone from being invisible to becoming someone whose opinion mattered. It wasn't just about the job or the title. It was about the journey. The journey that had started with one simple act of speaking up, of challenging someone who thought they held all the power. She had been seen, and in that moment, Maya knew that no matter what happened next, she had already won. The world had changed, and it had changed because she had refused to stay silent. Maya smiled to herself, a quiet sense of pride filling her chest as she walked back to her desk. This was just the beginning. Maya sat at her new desk, the weight of the last few months finally settling in. She had come so far, from being the quiet cleaning staff to becoming a trusted advisor at one of the most powerful companies in the city. She couldn't quite believe it. The office was sleek and modern, everything polished to perfection, just like the life she had entered. But inside, she felt the same, unsure, humbled, and above all, determined. Every morning, she entered this building with a quiet confidence that had taken her years to build. She was no longer the girl who just followed orders. She was the one giving them now, making decisions that affected the future of the company. Yet, the challenges she faced were far from over. Every time she sat in a meeting, surrounded by executives with years of experience, she couldn't help but feel a spark of doubt. They had all been in the game longer than she had. They were more qualified, more seasoned. But somehow, Maya had proven that qualifications weren't the only thing that mattered. It was perspective. It was the ability to see things others couldn't. Richard had seen it from the start, but Maya wasn't sure if the others ever would. She had earned their respect, but it wasn't an easy thing to keep. In the back of her mind, she wondered if they would ever truly accept her, or if she would always be the outsider, the woman who had come from nothing. The next few weeks would be critical. The company was about to make a big move, a merger that could change everything. Maya had been working with Richard on the details, reviewing contracts, and advising on the potential risks. The pressure was mounting, and she could feel it in her bones. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Richard asked Maya to meet him in his office. She walked in, the familiar feeling of uncertainty creeping up again. Richard was sitting at his desk, a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Maya, I need you to take a look at this," he said, sliding a contract toward her. "It's the final draft for the merger. I need your perspective." Maya nodded, sitting down and picking up the papers. She could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was the kind of decision that could make or break careers. Richard trusted her. But did she trust herself? She scanned the contract, her mind racing as she processed the numbers and terms. Something didn't feel right. There was a clause buried deep in the fine print, one that seemed to shift the risk to the smaller company. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she read it again. It was the same type of clause that had almost cost Richard everything weeks ago. She looked up at him, her voice steady. "There's a problem here," she said. Richard didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. "What's the problem?" he asked. Maya pointed to the clause. "This is a trap. It's designed to make the smaller company take all the risk. If something goes wrong, they'll be on the hook, not us." Richard's expression hardened, but there was something in his eyes, something Maya hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was admiration. "You really are something, Maya," he said quietly. She wasn't sure what to make of the compliment, but she nodded, focusing on the task at hand. "We can't let this go through. It'll ruin both companies." Richard sat up, his demeanor changing. "You're right. Let's fix it." The meeting ended, and Maya walked out of his office, her mind racing. She had done it again. She had caught something no one else had seen. But the real victory wasn't in the work. It was in the trust. Richard trusted her, and that meant more to her than any title or recognition. As she made her way back to her desk, Maya couldn't help but think about how far she had come. She had started with nothing but a job cleaning floors. Now, she was in a position to change the course of the company, to make a real difference. She had proved that no matter where you come from, you could make an impact if you were willing to fight for it. Maya sat at her desk, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Maya's days at the company had started to blend together, each one flowing seamlessly into the next. The weight of her responsibilities was no longer something she carried with hesitation. It had become a part of her, a natural extension of who she was now. She no longer doubted her place in the room. The once daunting meetings with Richard and the executives now felt like another day at the office. Yet, as she sat at her desk one morning, going through the final details of a new contract, Maya realized just how much her life had changed. The world around her was still moving fast, but for the first time, it felt like she was moving at the same speed. Richard's trust in her had grown, and with it, her sense of purpose. No longer was she the quiet woman in the back of the room. She was now a trusted advisor, someone whose input mattered, someone who was shaping decisions. Maya had proven that people could rise above their circumstances, that titles and positions weren't what defined you. It was your ability to see things from a different perspective, to think critically, and to stand your ground when it counted. As she continued to work alongside Richard, they developed a rhythm, a partnership built on mutual respect. She would often find herself advising him on details he had missed, her fresh perspective uncovering risks or opportunities the others hadn't considered. Richard had always prided himself on his sharp mind, but even he had to admit that Maya had opened his eyes to things he might have overlooked. There was one afternoon, however, that changed everything. Maya was working late, finishing up some paperwork in Richard's office when he came in, looking more serious than usual. She looked up as he closed the door behind him, a silent request for privacy. "Maya," he began, his voice unusually soft. "I've been thinking about what's next for this company, and I've realized something." Maya put down the papers in front of her, her focus entirely on him. "What's that?" she asked. "I've spent my entire career building something, but I never stopped to think about the people I've built it for. I've always focused on profit, on numbers, on expanding. But it's more than that. It's about the people, the ones who work here, the ones who make the decisions. And I've realized, I've been wrong." Maya tilted her head, unsure of where this was going. Richard paused for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts. "I've been given so many opportunities in life, Maya. Opportunities that others don't get. And you've earned everything you have, without those advantages." He stepped closer, his expression genuine. "I want to make sure that the company we're building is one that supports people like you, who didn't have the same starting point, but still have what it takes to succeed. I want to make sure we're doing things differently from now on." Maya felt her heart skip a beat. She wasn't sure if it was the sincerity in his voice or the magnitude of his words, but something inside her shifted. For a moment, she was just a woman hearing someone acknowledge her worth, truly see her for the first time. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to take a bigger role here," Richard said, his eyes locked with hers. "I don't just mean as an advisor. I want you to help me reshape this company. I want you to lead our diversity and inclusion efforts. I want you to help me build something that reflects the values we're talking about." Maya blinked, stunned. "Lead? I'm not sure I understand." "You've already led by example, Maya. Now it's time for you to lead the way for others." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Maya sat back in her chair, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just a job offer. This was an opportunity to change the direction of the company, to make an impact that went beyond profits and growth. This was a chance to do something that mattered. She looked at Richard, his eyes filled with confidence in her, and for the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was what she had been working toward all along. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady. Richard smiled, the tension in his face melting away. "I knew you would." As Maya left his office that day, a new chapter in her life began to unfold. She was no longer just an employee at the company. She was a leader, ready to help guide the organization into a future where everyone, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to succeed. Maya's new role had begun to change her entire outlook on life. She was no longer just an observer in the office. She was now someone who had the power to influence the company's future. She felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders, but with it came a sense of purpose she had never known before. She spent long hours meeting with teams, reviewing policies, and working alongside Richard to create a more inclusive environment within the company. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of it all felt too much. She had never expected to be in a position where her opinions and decisions could affect so many lives. But each day, she found herself growing more confident in the choices she made. The work was difficult, but it felt meaningful. Richard was right. She had already proven herself as a leader, and now she was using that position to guide the company toward a future where opportunity wasn't defined by background or status, but by talent and potential. Maya's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Slowly, the company began to change. New policies were implemented, ensuring that diversity and inclusion were at the core of every hiring decision, every promotion, and every business partnership. The changes were subtle at first, but they began to build momentum. Employees, especially those from marginalized communities, started to feel like their voices mattered. It wasn't just about having a seat at the table. It was about making sure everyone had a say in the decisions that were being made. Maya worked tirelessly, but she didn't do it alone. She had Richard's support, but she also had the support of others who believed in the changes she was working to bring about. The company's leadership team began to reflect the diversity of the employees they served. Maya wasn't just making the company better for herself, she was making it better for everyone. Yet, even as things improved, Maya still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to do. The work wasn't finished, and the road ahead was long. There were still challenges to face, still battles to fight. But for the first time in her life, Maya wasn't afraid of the fight. One morning, after a particularly successful meeting with the board of directors, Maya found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She had gone from being a janitor to becoming one of the most influential people at the company. It wasn't just the job that had changed her, it was the realization that she had earned every step of the way. As she walked through the office that morning, she noticed the looks of respect from her colleagues. She wasn't just a person to be overlooked anymore. She had earned her place, and that place was now a seat at the table. Maya couldn't help but smile to herself. She had worked so hard to get here, and now that she was here, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. It wasn't just about success in the traditional sense. It was about finding purpose in the work she did, knowing that the changes she was making were real and that they were lasting. As she sat at her desk later that day, Richard walked by and stopped to speak with her. He was smiling, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something softer. "You've done good work, Maya," he said, his voice filled with pride. Maya looked up, a slight smile playing on her lips. "We've done good work," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done it without you." Richard nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "No, you've made it your own. And that's something I'll always respect." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't just a tool to carry out someone else's vision. She had become a creator of her own path, a path that was now intertwined with the company's future. The changes she had made were only the beginning. She knew there was still more work to do, but for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Maya sat at her desk late one evening, the soft hum of the building's air conditioning the only sound filling the space. The office had emptied out hours ago, the usual buzz of activity replaced by a quiet stillness. The city lights outside cast long shadows across the floor, and the glow from her computer screen was the only source of illumination in the room. The weight of the day, the decisions made, the work she had done, settled over her like a gentle but firm blanket. She wasn't sure what time it was. Time seemed to have stopped the moment she had walked through the doors that morning. As her fingers lightly rested on the edge of her desk, she looked out the window at the darkening sky, the city stretching out endlessly below. The sounds of the world outside felt distant, as if she was observing it from another life. The silence in the room was not uncomfortable, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had changed. Maya's gaze wandered over to the empty chair opposite her desk, the one that had been occupied by Richard just hours ago. He had left quietly, like the others, leaving the office almost as silent as it had been when she first arrived. The only sign of his presence was the warmth that still lingered in the air. It was a quiet kind of change, one that didn't need to be spoken, but could be felt. The small movements, the subtle shift in how people treated her, how they regarded her, those were the changes that mattered most. It wasn't the promotions, the recognition, or the new title. It was the moments like this, when she was alone in the office, reflecting on how far she had come. Maya shifted in her seat, the soft fabric of her chair creaking under her weight. She pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, feeling the slight chill in the air as the temperature outside dropped. Her fingers moved to the pen on her desk, absent-mindedly tracing the shape of it. There were no grand celebrations, no loud declarations. Just this quiet stillness, this sense of something that had been set into motion, something irreversible. She had done what she set out to do. She had fought for a place, for respect, for a voice, and now, for the first time, she could sit in silence and feel that she belonged. She wasn't a woman of grand gestures or loud words, and that was precisely why her presence had mattered. She didn't need to command attention. The change was in the quiet, in the small moments of recognition that spoke louder than any applause. Outside the window, the last traces of sunlight disappeared, and the city's lights flickered like 1,000 tiny stars. The hum of the air conditioning grew softer, blending with the gentle sounds of the night. Maya stood up slowly, walking to the window, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty room. She placed her hand against the cool glass, looking out at the city she had once felt so far removed from. Now, as she stood there, watching the world continue on as it always did, she realized that she had become part of it. She was no longer an outsider. She wasn't invisible. She had found her place, quietly and without fanfare, but with every bit of strength she had. The air was cooler now, the silence deeper, and as the night fully took hold of the city, Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself simply breathe. The world was still moving, but in this moment, it was enough to simply be. The breath she took was slow, steady, and the weight of everything she had fought for seemed to dissipate, leaving only peace. In the stillness of the office, Maya stood as the quiet witness to her own victory, a victory not in the accolades, but in the silent acknowledgement of her worth. The city outside continued to hum, life carrying on, but Maya remained, holding on to the silence that spoke louder than anything else.